What can I say? I know there's no way to repay you, only to offer you my praise. Your grace still amazes me. Your love is still a mystery.
song, and it's number 825 in the book. I think Chris is going to have it on the screen. So go ahead and stand as Trey gets ready to lead us for singing.
Thank you, Trey. If the Bible is the Word of God, and the Bible is perfect, and everything in this book is true, therefore, we should be able to go to it and pull out the little snippets and check that with history and see if they mash up. And tonight, I want to do that with one of the more bigger stories in the Old Testament. We're going to look at the pharaohs of Egypt and see if we can find one or two that matches up with the Exodus. And before we begin, I've got a couple bracketing statements. That's a little bit on the small side. Sorry. Some lessons come early, and this is a lesson for me. Establishing the years within Egyptian history is very, very difficult. And there's multiple reasons why. Sometimes when one pharaoh, 3 or 4 years before one pharaoh departs and the other one starts, there's an overlap. So like a father may sit on the throne and his son also sit on the throne. So the 26th year of Pharaoh X is also the 2nd year of Pharaoh Y. And so that makes things difficult. There's also 2 different lines that scholars look at. You've got the high chronology and the low chronology. I'm not going to go into which one's which, but they're 2 different sets of years that scholars look at when they try to lay out the Egyptian history. Most of what I'm going to show you today is favoring the high chronology. The Egyptians practiced damnatio memoriae. This is when if they don't like the history, they try to remove it. So if a pharaoh is unfavorable in years into the future, they will start scrubbing that pharaoh from history. So sometimes it's difficult to go back and fill in the blanks because they've erased the blanks. And one more thing I want us to just know is I'm going to be telling you who I think the Pharaoh of the Exodus is, but there's no possible way for us to know without a doubt who that Pharaoh is. We're going to be talking about a lot of pharaohs, but the two we're going to be looking at primarily are Ramses II and Amenhotep II. The reason we're looking at Ramses II, Exodus 1 verse 11 mentions the city of Ramesses, and it's thought that, hey, that's really small. It's thought that this might be Pi Ramesses, and Pi Ramesses was built by Ramesses. Therefore, the thinking goes, if the Israelites, the Hebrews, lived in the city of Ramesses, therefore it has to be in Ramesses or Ramesside dynasty. Amenhotep II is suggested by Manetho. Manetho is a Egyptian priest, Egyptian historian. We do not have Manetho's writings, but we do have quotes, and this is taken from a Josephus quote. These are the two pharaohs we're going to look at predominantly. So some standards that we need to establish. How do we look at a pharaoh and say, yes, he could be, or no, he couldn't? Moses grew up in Egypt, and then he left for 40 years. So looking at that, the preceding pharaoh needs to be on the throne or reigning for at least 40 years. Now, I am going to give a little caveat to this later on, but at this point in the lesson, we're going to say he needs to be reigning for 40 years. The 10th plague was the death of the firstborn. Therefore, the successor may not be a firstborn. So if a father was the Exodus Pharaoh, and then his firstborn son follows him, then we can't say that he was. And the third one is a biblical timeline. It is widely accepted that the temple was built, Solomon's temple was built in the year 967 BC. 1 Kings 6 and verse 1 says that Solomon built the temple 480 years after the Exodus. So, therefore, the Exodus happened in around the 1400s BC. One little interesting tidbit on this, I'm not a good scholar on the versions of Bibles that we have, but our modern version is a little bit different from the oldest version that we have in this verse here. Most of our versions say 480 years. The oldest version we have of this verse says 450 years. Now, I don't think that's a big difference, but it will come into play here in a few minutes when we're starting to look at our pharaohs. So we've got our two pharaohs that we're going to look at. Ramesses II, who is often viewed in movies. Anytime you watch a movie with the Exodus, the pharaoh is always Ramesses. And that's why I chose him here. Amenhotep II, a little spoiler alert, I think he fits best. When I look at the data and try to see who checks off all the boxes, to me it is Amenhotep. There is a second pharaoh that I'm going to introduce you to. I guess it'd be third. If I've got two on the slide and I'm mentioning another one, it'd be a third. But I'll introduce him when he comes. Ramesses II, did his predecessor reign for 40 years? No. Seti I reigned for 11 to 15 years. Was the successor a non-firstborn? This is actually very common. I did not realize how common this was, to have a non-firstborn succeed the pharaoh. And it's not because the pharaoh says, I want so-and-so, not the first child. It was very common for the firstborn child to predecease the pharaoh. This was more common than I thought it would be. So yes, he matches that one. Does it align with the biblical time frame? No. He reigned from 1279 to 1213 BC. There are a lot of scholars that try to make Ramesses II fit in this mold. And what they do is they take that 480 years and say, well, it's not a literal 480 years. It's a certain number of why does the word just leave your mind when you're talking? Generations. And so they try to play with this number and just make it fit in this box. But it really doesn't fit. So then look at Amenhotep II. Does his predecessor reign for 40 years? Yes. The guy before Amenhotep II was one of the longest reigning pharaohs of Egyptian history. Was the successor a non-firstborn? Yes. Thutmose IV was a surprise pharaoh, and in fact, Amenhotep II was not a firstborn. My belief, when I read the account of the Exodus, the Bible tells us that all the firstborns and all the firstborn cattle died. I don't believe that that is just the children. I think that pertains to the adults as well. And so, if that's the case, and Pharaoh was a firstborn, he would not have survived as well. So I believe this is another strength for Amenhotep II. Does he align with the biblical timeline? Yes, very well. If you look at 967 BC as far as when the temple was created, and that 480 years, you come up with, I believe it's 14, I shouldn't do math in front of people, 1446-ish, and that is right in line with where Amenhotep II is. Oh, and then I got a big red X. I forgot about that. You might be able to read this. So what I did, next time I'll try to split things up on different screens. I'm sorry. So what I tried to do is build a slide to where if Amenhotep was the pharaoh that was in charge when the Exodus occurred, I tried to fit everything else in this timeline. So, and I'm going to kind of ignore the dates. I put that more in there for reference. I don't trust those dates. I took them from somebody else. Ahmose I would have been the pharaoh that knew not Joseph. Just to give you a little bit of backstory into Ahmose I, there was a group of people that came into Egypt and conquered. Egypt was split into Lower and Upper Egypt. They came in and conquered a portion of it. These are the Hyksos. The Hyksos were a Semitic people. They were foreign, and they ruled Egypt. They ruled half of Egypt for a small time period. Ahmose I came in and conquered them. I believe that the Hyksos were in charge when Joseph came to Egypt. This would explain why they were so willing to look at a foreigner and put a foreigner in charge, because they were already foreigners in charge. And so when Ahmose I came and conquered these outside invaders and ran them out, that would easily explain why they did not know Joseph. Amenhotep I really doesn't relate, but I wanted to keep him in just to show you the lineage. Thutmose I would have been the pharaoh when Moses was born. Thutmose II would have ordered the deaths of babies. Hatshepsut would have been Pharaoh's daughter. Thutmose III is the pharaoh that sought Moses' life. Amenhotep II is the Exodus pharaoh. Thutmose IV, wandering in the wilderness, which continued through Amenhotep III. And then we see the conquest in, I can't read that, Akhenaten's time. So just kind of going through, I'm concerned that I'm going to run out of time. So normally when I'm concerned of running out of time, I do the opposite and go super fast and end early. If I do that, I'm sorry. So we're going to start with Ahmose I. And I kind of got ahead of myself on this one. Egypt was divided when he came to throne. And Lower Egypt was ruled by the Hyksos. Lower Egypt is lower in elevation, but it's the northern part. They were ruled by the Hyksos, who were Semitic foreigners who conquered half of Egypt. And so this is when I think Joseph came in. Ahmose the first defeated the Hyksos and reunited Upper and Lower Egypt. And I believe this was the Pharaoh that knew not Joseph. So this part fits so far. Thutmose the first would have likely been the Pharaoh who was alive at Moses' birth. Thutmose was interesting. He had 2 wives. And I kind of enjoyed these titles more than I should have. One's official title was the Great Royal Wife. The other one was referred to as the Minor Wife. That was those two ladies who were married to Thutmose the first. The Great Royal Wife had a daughter, Hatshepsut, and the minor son had a son. The minor wife had a son named Thutmose the second. The Thutmose the first wanted his son to rule, but his son, since he was born through the minor wife, did not have a claim to the throne. So what he did, he married Hatshepsut and Thutmose the second, so that the son could have a claim to the throne. Thutmose the second was a very short-lived pharaoh. He was known for his brutality. One of the things he was known for is killing the firstborn babies of his enemies. Does it sound familiar? Because we read that the Pharaoh commanded that all the firstborn males were thrown into the Nile. And now we see a Pharaoh who is doing just that. He did not reign long. The lowest range that I saw was as little as 3 years. I know our slide earlier had a little bit more than 3 years. But Thutmose did not reign very long. Thutmose III is the son of Hatshepsut. He was only 2 years old when he began to co-rule with his mother, and the two of them hold the throne together quite some time. Thutmose III was a great conqueror, and under him, Egypt grew to the greatest size that they had been in quite some time, perhaps the greatest size ever. Amenemhat, the firstborn son, died before the father. Hatshepsut is a very interesting person. You can run down this rabbit hole forever, and I let myself run for a while, but I'm going to try to be restrained with our time this evening. If you'll recall, I said Hatshepsut was born from the great royal and then the other one was just minor wife. She took great pride in her lineage because she was royal born. Her brother, who became Pharaoh, and her husband, he was not royal born. The only way he was able to come to the throne was by marrying her. And so she referred to herself as Pharaoh's daughter. And this is actually a kind of a slap in everybody else's face, because I'm Pharaoh's daughter. That other guy, he was nobody. And so this is a claim to her heritage. She is also the only person in history that I could find refers to herself as Pharaoh's daughter. So I am very confident that the Pharaoh's daughter who brought Moses out of the Nile, who sent Moses' sister to go find his mother, who raised Moses, I'm confident this was Hatshepsut. I could not find anybody else who it could be. One of the statements that was ascribed to her, my spirit is inclined towards the foreign people. And we see that she drew someone, or if she's the one that drew Moses out, and then she's inclined towards the foreign people, this is more evidence that she could be. Have you ever been talking and then realized your notes contradict each other and you don't know which one's right? Previously, I think it was the last slide, I said that Thutmose II was a son of Hatshepsut, but my next point is she had no male children. Full disclosure, I don't know which one of these two is correct. I wished I did because I didn't notice this till just now. I was reading that last slide, I was like, I think this is going to get me in trouble, and it did. Never mind. Let me read the rest of the point, and then, oh my goodness. Had no male children, her successor was born to a concubine. I got to start thinking before I talk. This is where I may run off the rails and get sidetracked and run a rabbit hole with all of us this evening. Hatshepsut had a mysterious friend, Senenmut. Senenmut was a commoner with low-born parents. We know who Senenmut's parents are. He rose to the highest ranks of Egyptian society. In Egyptian society, there were caste may not be the right word, but there was definite who is and who ain't. If you were a commoner, you did not associate with royalty. If you were a commoner in the room with royalty, you did not interact with them. And in no way did you ever touch them. We have statues of a Hatshepsut's daughter sitting in the lap of Senenmut. Who is this? Why would Pharaoh's daughter's daughter be sitting in the lap of a commoner? This guy was her tutor. That's not the kind of relationship that tutors have. He was given over 90 hereditary titles. And I believe I have some of those titles that he was given include hereditary crowned prince of Egypt, count, sole companion, master of all people, chief of the whole land, royal vizier, chief royal architect, chief steward who conducted all the works of the king, confidant of the king, privy counselor of the right hand, chief steward of the princess Neferuri, which is Hatshepsut's daughter. His administrative titles included wearer of the royal seal, steward of Amun, overseer of the granary of Amun, overseer of the storehouse of Amun, chief of the prophets of Montu in Hermonthis. And there are more. He was a soldier who participated in military campaigns. He oversaw building projects. He never married, and he mysteriously vanished at about 40 years of age. I think Senenmut is Moses because he is very prominent in Egyptian society. He is right there with the highest of the high. He is engaged with everybody. I did not realize that Josephus wrote at length on Moses. A lot of what Josephus says matches up with this Senenmut. He went on campaigns in I can't remember the region, but Senenmut went on military campaigns in a very specific region. Josephus says Moses went on military campaigns in this same region. He also speaks of the building projects that Moses did. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm leaning towards Senenmut and Moses being the same. And if Moses and Senenmut are the same, then Moses built this temple. And if you can let your imagination kind of run wild a little bit, could you not see Moses and the striking of the Egyptian guy happening around this building structure. Interesting enough, the time that Senenmut disappears from history is about the same time that Hatshepsut dies. Amenhotep II, this is who I believe is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Amenhotep II started his reign to outdo his father. Amenhotep II's father was his reign was one of the most prosperous of all the other pharaohs. The money was coming in, everything was going great when Amenhotep II took the throne. And Amenhotep II begins his reign very, very strongly. He runs 3 campaigns. I believe they're years 3, 6, and 7. He did 3 major military campaigns, one of which he came in with 101,000 captives. There's no record in Egyptian history that comes close to 101,000 captives that was brought in one campaign. So he starts very strong, trying to outdo his father. He is known for his cruelty. He would dig holes, throw prisoners in the hole, and then start a fire. There are a lot of rather graphic and grotesque analogies of the cruelty that Amenhotep II did. And if you look at Pharaoh's heart being hardened, I think it matches up beautifully with this cruelty. Amenhotep II ruled for 26 years, but all of the history we have of his rule stops at year 9. We have great knowledge of years 1 through 9. We have very little knowledge of years 10 through 26. Why? What happened? Also, during the latter part of his rule, we start to see that the Hatshepsut statues are starting to be defaced. People are actively going back and finding these statues and destroying them. Why? Hatshepsut's been dead for a few years. She was loved as a queen during the time of her life. All of a sudden, come back later, why is there so much hate and so much anger that we want to scrub her from history? Could it be that she raised Moses, who has now come back and taken the Israelites or the Hebrews away? In year, I want to say it's 23. In year 23 of Amenhotep II's reign, he sent a letter to his viceroy, Usaratet. If you're going to mispronounce something, just pronounce it confidently and no one will ever question you. So it's Usaratet. He sent a letter to him and said, he warns of the completely worthless, the untrustworthy inhabitants of the Levant. The Levant is the location of land where the Hebrews would have been at the time. And Usaratet was so enthralled by this letter that he had it inscribed in stone. He also spoke of their magicians and pay no heed to their message. The city of Avaris was a very large, mostly Semitic people, but at a very specific time in Amenhotep II's reign, it was very, very quickly abandoned. And the firstborn son mysteriously died. I started to put a picture up, but I didn't know how a picture of mummies might be taken. There is a mummy who is unidentified, but a lot of scholars think that it is Amenhotep II's son, who, if all of this is correct, we possibly have the mummy of the firstborn child killed in the 10th plague, which I thought was interesting. We also have Amenhotep II's mummy. And these are a few pictures of how he may have looked. Thutmose IV was a surprise pharaoh. And one of the interesting things about Thutmose IV is the dream stele. He builds this elaborate story trying to explain why he's justified to rule, which makes one believe that perhaps people look to him as being unjustified or not the real Pharaoh. And it's very interesting about how he was asleep at the feet of the Sphinx, and a God came to him and said, "You are going to rule the people." And it's this elaborate story just building a narrative that strengthens him as the rightful ruler. And now I am going too fast. I'm going way too fast. Amenhotep III made over 600 statues of Sekhmet, which is the goddess of healing. So if Amenhotep II was the Exodus Pharaoh, we are 2 pharaohs behind him. Why do you need 600 statues of the goddess of healing? What could have gone on in recent history that needs that kind of healing? I think I missed a slide in this iteration. The problem with trying to work on a slide deck at work and then at home and then go back to work, sometimes you save a version on a computer that doesn't get saved on the flash drive. Thutmose IV is my number 2 for the Exodus Pharaoh. I think Amenhotep II fits better, but Thutmose IV is my number 2. And my reasoning for that is he only ruled for 9 years, and immediately following, we see all these statues of healing coming up. Trying to remember what else was on that slide that's not here. It'll occur to me right after we end. Amenhotep III was a pacifist who went on only one conquest. And this is interesting because this stands out contrary to Egyptian norms. Almost always the pharaohs went and conquested Canaan. But this pharaoh goes the opposite direction, and he only goes on one conquest. Pharaohs love history, and you try to build a narrative today to explain how you'll be portrayed in history. And by only going on one conquest, it almost guarantees you will not be known well as a pharaoh. But more interesting, one of the inscriptions in his tomb speaks of the nomads of Yahweh. One of the biggest proponents that the Exodus never happened is that you don't find any history in Egypt of Semitic peoples in serving the land of Israel. But God actually answers this when he speaks to Moses, and Moses saying, "Well, who should we call you?" Over here to the left says they shows where they are. This is the first time we see the letter Egypt referring to those people wrote God as Egypt, Yahweh. We need help. This is what's going on. It is very. And under it, you've got what the Bible says happened in that. I really wish Akhenaten, because it lines up. We have the Armada letters. The Armada letters are sent by Canaanite rulers. The Armada letters says the land of Ashkelon is conquered by the Hebrew. Judges 1, verse 18, Ashkelon is taken by divine assistance. He transitioned Egypt to a monotheistic religion. Our motto letter says the Habiru killed a leader of Lachish and gained control of the city. And the evidence says that chapter 10 transition to monotheism, killed the king of Lachish in a separate land battle and later conquered the city. So we've got 15 different examples of these people called the Habiru. I was so proud of conquering cities together slide. In the region that the Hebrews know, reaching out to the Egyptians for help. This is 15. And that is in Akhenaten's time. A pylon inscription at a temple in Karnak reads, "The temples of the gods are fallen to ruin. Their bodies do not endure. I have watched as they have ceased their appearances, one after the other. All of them have stopped, except the God who gave birth to himself. And no one knows the mystery of how he performs his tasks. This God goes where he pleases, and no one else knows his going." This indicates a total loss of faith in Egyptians' gods. Why? You see, the 10 plagues, each of them was designed to go against a different God. Over a period of just a few years, within 100 years or so, we see Moses coming in, being raised in Pharaoh's house. We see Moses coming back, taking the people, leaving. Remember when they left, they asked to borrow, and so they took all the riches out of Egypt. And then they go and conquer these other lands. Interestingly, these lands in Canaan, they weren't ruled by Egypt, but they were loosely controlled. So the land in Canaan would have been overseen by Egypt. So it would have been expected for when the people of Canaan reached out for help, it was very expected that Egypt would have sent help. But instead, Egypt just kind of turned their backs. This is odd. If it makes you think that these Habiru people must have done something. There had to have been something happen that made Egypt not want to deal with these people. So what could that have been? I think that it was these the 10 plagues. I believe that if you look at these time frames, if you look at all the events that happened, the historical narrative and the biblical narrative are perfectly in sync with each other. And I believe that Amenhotep II was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And I believe this is just further proof that what God put together in our Bible is truly inspired by him. And true to my statement, I'm about 4 minutes ahead of time. Four minutes for questions, comments, or grievances?
I'll ask you a question. What got you so interested in the Pharaohs? It's an interesting subject, but you've done a lot of research and study, but give me something that focused you on that.
There is a book. I had a job one time where you would literally do 3 minutes of work for every hour, and 57 minutes of the hour you're sitting there keeping yourself occupied, staring out a window. And it was night shifts. You're trying to keep yourself awake. And I read a book about the Hebrew pharaohs of Egypt. And it tried to put Joseph in Egypt. And I disagree with a lot of what that book said. But there's a lot of interesting things. One thing is they found the a structure where there were, I believe it was 12 different tombs. One tomb was hastily opened, not robbed, but hastily opened, and the body was taken. The other 11 or 12 were left alone. And the argument they were making was that was Joseph's tomb, and they left his brothers there, but they took Joseph's bones back to the promised land. And if you look at one spot in history, and I'm a student of history, I love history, and if you look at one spot, and if that's true, then you kind of got to keep going to figure out, is it all true? And I just couldn't stop. Still can't stop. That was only 2 minutes. I'll give you 2 minutes. Y'all have a good evening.